Okay, I think we can start. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Improving Reproducibility Through Diverse Research Outputs. My name is Melissa, and I'm a marketing executive at F1000, and I'm here to provide any technical supports in today's session. But before we start, let's go through some webinar housekeeping. First of all participants will be muted throughout the webinar, but please do write your questions in the questions box, which can be found on your GoToWebinar control panel, which looks like the image that you can see on this slide. Our presenters will be answering as many questions as possible during the designated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. However, if your question isn't answered today, we'll be in touch with you shortly after. Also, if for any reason you need to drop off the webinar, that's not an issue at all, as the session is being recorded and will be sent to you tomorrow. Our speakers for today are Brook and Tom Sinden from the F1000 publishing team. They will walk you through different research outputs and demonstrate how that they can help support and improve reproducibility. Passing over to you now, Tom, and enjoy the webinar, everyone.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So I hope you're all doing well today. My name's Tom, and I'm a publishing executive at F1000. I'm joined today by Jack, who's an associate publisher at F1000 as well. And over the following webinar, as Melissa said, we'll be looking at how reproducibility in publishing, particularly with a nod towards open publishing, is defined, and why this is important in the grand scheme of things when considering advancing scientific knowledge and understanding within the research community. We'll then be looking at F1000 as a publisher more specifically, and the role that we've played in helping to champion reproducible research since the launch of our flagship platform, F1000 Research, almost a decade ago, and discuss a few of the unique article types offered on the F1000 publishing platform, which will help support reproducibility through their aims, scopes, and ultimate goal. We'll also have an opportunity for questions and comments at the end of this talk, as well as links to resources which may be of use to you when considering publishing your research in the future. The slides will be available as a handout as a part of this webinar, but if you do have any questions regarding any of the topics covered today, or more broadly about open research publishing, F1000 as a publisher, or the F1000 research platform more generally, then please feel free to reach out to either Jack or myself after this talk, and we'd be happy to help. So with that being said, I'm now going to pass over to Jack to explain how we define reproducibility in more detail.
Thanks, Tom, and morning, everyone. So yeah, my name is Jack Brook, and I'm an associate publisher at F1000. So just to kind of kick things off today, I think it's worth having a look at exactly what we mean when we talk about reproducibility and how we should define that concept. So I think everyone can agree that reproducibility is a really foundational part of the scientific method. And probably the most common definition you will find for reproducibility is really being able to obtain consistent results using the same data and code as the original study. So in practice, researchers should essentially be able to arrive at those same conclusions if they attempt to recreate the original experiment as presented by the authors. So in order to actually recreate that experiment, researchers must have full access to the original paper and data. So in other words, what was done in a given line of research. So this obviously means transparency and open science is absolutely essential in achieving the goal of reproducibility. It's worth mentioning too that there are clearly different aspects to reproducibility, and the definition can vary from discipline to discipline. So we've included a few examples in the slides where we see different kind of aspects of reproducibility in action. So we see things like direct replication, reanalysis, and conceptual replication.
So as Jack mentioned, transparency in research is critical as it develops an element of trust between the readers and the research output itself, and of course more broadly with the authorship and contributing teams to any research article as well. Reproducibility in research helps to cultivate and foster that trust further, and by ensuring that research outputs are as open as possible, the work of the authors can be more easily evaluated by any relevant stakeholder, whether that's an editor, a referee, a reader, a funder, or anyone else with a potential interest in the research itself. By publishing in a more closed and irreproducible manner, authors are instead removing that element of trust from their work, which is ultimately to its detriment. There are additional benefits to publishing reproducibility as well, which impact both the authorship teams and the wider community. With consideration of the authors first, a transparent approach to publishing research ensures that editors and referees who are liable to critically evaluate an article are able to do so far easier and more effortlessly than the alternative. This in turn can lead to quicker turnaround times in having a research output published and fully indexed, which is obviously preferential to the authors. And papers published in this transparent manner as well typically tend to perform far greater than those that are published closed when considering their level of interaction. So one example of this was at Taylor and Francis, articles published open access typically received 32% more citations and over 6 times as many downloads as those that were published closed in 2021. Additionally, by encouraging reproducibility within your publication, you are enabling researchers to build on the basis of your original research and drive science forward using the foundations you've helped to lay. So this severely reduces research waste, and of course this is again to the betterment of the broader scientific community.
Thanks, Tom. So now we're just going to do a little poll to ask everyone what you think the biggest barriers are to reproducibility. So we've picked out 5 key issues for you to choose from. So I'll just ask Melissa to start the poll now.
Jack, I confirm I have launched the poll.
Thanks, Melissa.
Let's just give it a couple of seconds so that everyone can vote. And closing the poll now. And Jack, can you see the results?
Yeah, I can see them. So yeah, that's really interesting. So obviously lack of details in the method section and data and codes not being available, obviously really important ones. And then also quite a lot of choosing publication bias towards novel findings, which is great because these are some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So in terms of F1000 and how we've actually been working to support reproducibility. So as Tom mentioned, we launched way back in 2013 as a fully open access publisher, which is obviously really important in ensuring everyone has actual access to papers to attempt to reproduce those results in the first place. So from day one, since we launched, F1000 has had a mandatory open data policy. So we were actually the first publisher to adopt such a policy, but we've since seen a number of others following the same direction since then. So what that policy means in practice is that authors should provide their underlying data unless there's a specific reason why they cannot, such as ethical or commercial sensitivities. And our general approach to data availability is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So subsequently, we have endorsed the fair data principles as really a kind of a framework for this data policy. And that really ensures that data is ready for the community to reuse and crucially enhances the ability of machines to automatically find and use that data. So those fair data principles, for those who don't know, being data must be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So F1000 is also a sound science publisher. So we judge research based on the rigor and soundness of the science rather than any objective assessment of the impact or novelty of results. So what this means in terms of reproducibility is that authors are empowered to share things like replication studies, negative and null results, all of which help to really combat publication bias, reduce research waste, and also reduce duplication of effort too. So last but not least, reproducibility is also actually embedded within the peer review process on F1000 platforms. So peer reviewers answer a series of standardized questions, including on whether the results and source data ensure full reproducibility. And those reviewers are also encouraged to address the issue of reproducibility in the main body of their peer review report. So the end result of this approach and these policies is that readers and peer reviewers have full access to research, to methods, and they can fully analyze and reuse the data and codes. And that really gives them the best opportunity to reproduce results and ultimately build upon the original findings.
Thanks, Jack. So, as Jack mentioned, F1000 have been looking to help champion reproducibility in research for some time now, almost a decade, and we're consistently looking for innovative solutions to this effect. So this has been evidenced in our working with other publishers, funders, institutes, organizations, researchers, and so on to develop our policies and principles on this topic. This timeline on this slide highlights just a few of the major steps that we've taken in this regard, and of which I'll detail a few of these now. So we've been able to develop external agreements with Plotly, CodeOcean, Protocols.io, and the UK Reproducibility Network as just a few examples of our work with independent organisations. So for context, our partnership with Plotly enabled authors to create and use interactive figures, charts, networks, and maps. And this occurred in 2017, which was the same year our agreement with CodeOcean allowed authors and readers to develop, share, publish, and download computational code within an environment embedded directly onto an article. In 2018, so a year later, our partnership with Protocols.io allowed authors to detail the recipes in the method section of their papers. And as Jack has already touched on, this was the same year we began endorsing the fair data sharing principles within our open data policies. Our agreement with the UKRN in 2019 was for F1000 Research to become an affiliate member of the Stakeholder Engagement Group. And through this, we've been able to support the work of the UKRN and aim to uphold their standards for reproducible research, which lay the foundations for us as a publisher to encourage better research and transparency in research methodology. And importantly, this agreement also helped us to understand what the community's needs are with regards to reproducibility, and enabled us to do what we do best, which has been piloting and innovating ways to ensure that publications on F1000 Research are of the highest standard possible and are fully reproducible. So So F1000 as an entity has also changed considerably over this period, with perhaps the most notable example of this being our acquisition by Taylor and Francis in 2020. This demonstrated a level of support by TNF in the approach that F1000 had taken towards open and reproducible publishing to this point, and enabled us to broaden the scope of F1000 Research as a platform, with open research publications now encouraged across all disciplines, from life and health sciences to the physical sciences to the humanities and social sciences. And just finally on this point, I'd like to mention the partner and funder platforms which F1000 have been able to launch. So I've included a few of our Diamond open access platforms, which were launched in partnership with the Wellcome Trust, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the European Commission specifically. But there are multiple new F1000 platforms which have been launched in this period, all of which are looking to create more accessible and viable routes to publication for researchers, and which in turn should enable them to publish their research in a more reproducible manner.
Thanks, Tom. So now, just before we start talking more specifically about our article types, we're interested to learn what subject area everyone's research kind of falls under. So we've picked out a few here, and please do just choose other if your subject area isn't shown as an option. So Melissa, if you can start the poll.
Jack, I confirm that I have launched the poll. As before, let's leave it open for a couple of seconds to give everyone a chance to vote.
Thank you.
And closing the poll now.
Great. Okay. Yeah, unsurprisingly, perhaps because of how we've had to break this down, other has been the most popular choice there, followed by medical and/or health sciences, and then biological sciences and physical science, engineering, and the last one being earth and environmental sciences. Great. Thanks everyone for that. So now we're just going to kind of move on and talk a little bit more about our article types on F1000. So as part of our work on reproducibility, F1000 publishes quite a diverse range of article types, and that's really to ensure the visibility of non-traditional research outputs. So all articles published on F1000 Research are published as separate citable items, providing credit for all aspects of research, so not just traditional research articles. So industry standard article level metrics are provided, including views, downloads, citations, and social shares, helping to measure the true impact of the use and reuse of all the research being published. So this is quite a new way of publishing all your research outputs with transparency and open science placed really at the center of the entire research process. So in practice, it means that researchers can capture all of their outputs and that nothing is wasted in the life cycle of a single research project. And this level of transparency is obviously absolutely essential in ensuring full reproducibility of research. So this diagram you can see on screen here provides a really nice visualization of when and how researchers can actually take advantage of all of these different article types and really take that open science approach in sharing as much as possible from your research project. So in addition to the benefits to reproducibility, which we've kind of touched upon already, sorry, Tom, can you just go back a slide? Authors can also really benefit from this transparent approach too. So writing that final research article should be much easier and more impactful for the community if the methods are published, vetted, revised and citable, the supporting data is fully accessible and citable, and any relevant analytical tools such as software are also available and citable. So what we're going to do now is just provide some sort of real life examples of how these article types have been able to support reproducibility on our F1000 Research publishing platform. So we've highlighted these article types today, but I would encourage everyone to have a look for themselves after the webinar and really see the variety of outputs being published on the platform. So here we've provided a sort of high-level overview of some of the examples that we'll be covering in more detail today. So data notes, these articles put data sets into context. They provide information on how and why the data were created, including the rationale, protocol, and validation details. Method articles offer authors the chance to provide the required level of detail for researchers to reproduce an experiment. So we saw this in the poll already, but in traditional research articles, methods can really offer limited detail, which actually hinders reproducibility. We also have software tools which directly support computational reproducibility. So they also provide assurance on how results are actually generated. And then study protocols and their additional step registered reports, which enable the pre-registering of studies. So this can really help to tackle the problem of publication bias and prevent any retrospective changes to the hypotheses. So we don't quite have time to cover study protocols and registered reports fully today, but as mentioned before, please do have a look at F1000 Research for some really great examples of these articles in action. So we'll now give you a few specific examples of how data notes, method articles, and software tools which have been published on F1000 research are really helping to support reproducibility.
Great, thanks, Jack. So as Jack mentioned, one of the articles really that helps authors to maximize the potential of their research data specifically is a data note article. So this is an example of a research output which champions a key element of that research process, which Jack showed on that diagram earlier. And of course, this in turn encourages reproducibility in the research itself. So for context, data notes are brief descriptions of scientific data sets that promote the potential reuse of research data and include details of how and why this data was created. Additionally, they allow the authors to describe the availability and subsequent limitations of a data set, as well as any related validation details that there may be. However, maybe most critically, they do not include any analyses or conclusions, and as I mentioned, instead champion the dataset and best working practices associated with the data, as opposed to highlighting conclusions within a field of research, more similarly to a traditional research article, for example. So as demonstrated by Jack earlier, data notes typically tend to be suitable to be written between the collection and analysis stages of a research project due to their lack of conclusive research. And one of the key benefits of this article type is the opportunity they provide to data producers and researchers to obtain appropriate accreditation for their work on a project, as opposed to just touching on the data within a section of a broader research article. They really act as a mechanism to give appropriate credit to these data producers with a citable publication on our platform. So we welcome all types of data, as we understand that data can come in many forms. So whether your data set is computational, experimental, observational, curated, or something else entirely, we would welcome your data in the form of a data note article on F1000 research. And finally, data notes are perhaps the most appropriate example of our open data policy in action, and as Jack mentioned earlier, would obviously support the FAIR principles related to data. So in addition to those I've already mentioned, there are other benefits to publishing a data note. So for example, these articles allow authors to share their data sets in discoverable, usable, and reproducible ways. And data notes also tend to foster new collaborations across different disciplines, which is often not possible in a traditional research article. So F1000 Research has a plethora of tools and resources online which can help authors with the deposition of a data set in the most appropriate data repository. And this in turn helps encourage and facilitate rigorous peer review to this article type. So I've included an example of a data note on this slide, which you will be able to access following the handout of this presentation at the end of this webinar. This is a paper published on the platform by Professors Ben Shirley, Elasios Moukaki, and Peter Rogan. And this paper presents a significant public resource of mRNA splicing mutations, which were validated according to multiple lines of evidence of abnormal gene expression. Of course, if this is a topic that interests you specifically, I'd encourage you to find the paper on F1000 Research to learn more. But specifically when considering it as an example of a data note article, this is an example, it's a prime example, I should really say, of an authorship group utilizing the aims of a data note by discussing the tool that they produce. So in this case, it was a website. Again, with no definitive analysis or conclusion, but instead acting as a guide to this resource. Another great example of the impact and reproducibility that a data note can have in action can be seen on a paper that I haven't highlighted on this slide, but was actually seen in a PLOS article from 2018, where Professor Santiago and his team identified 92 expansin genes in the sugarcane genome. However, this research was facilitated by a data note article which was published by Professors Riano Pachon and Mattiello on F1000 Research a year prior. And in describing their sugarcane dataset using a data note article, Professors Riano Pachon and Mattiello enabled other researchers to identify and characterize new genes in this crop, which is obviously just a key example of reproducibility in action in publishing research. And finally, you can see I've also included a summary of the article level metrics for the mRNA paper. These are openly available to any reader on any paper published on any F1000 platform, in this case F1000 Research, and demonstrate how readers and authors can access and disseminate research through multiple channels, which further acts as a means to champion reproducibility in research published on the F1000 platforms.
Thanks, Tom. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about method articles. So just for clarity, these articles describe a new experimental or computational method, test, or procedure, and should have been well tested before submission. So this kind of includes new study methods, substantive modification to existing methods, or innovative applications of existing methods to new models or scientific questions. So on F1000 Research, authors are able to publish their methods at several stages within the actual research journey. So at the planning stage, which enables authors to receive feedback so they can vet and revise the methods. So this really ensures that problems are identified and fixed nice and early in the research process, which will obviously benefit the authors further down the line. It's also possible for authors to publish during the data collection or analysis stage of their research. And researchers often find that the sort of traditional research articles don't actually afford enough space to really comprehensively describe their research methods. So by publishing a dedicated method article, the authors are making it easier for others to reuse and reproduce their research. So again, this approach can really help to build trust in the validity and impact of your research, because the scientific record demonstrates the methodology has been thoroughly peer-reviewed. So I've picked out a really nice example to sort of highlight this of an impactful method article published on F1000 Research a couple of years ago. So this paper reports on a method for building a low-cost 3D printed microscope for the purpose of fluorescence imaging. So all aspects of the work, including the software used, algorithms and schematics, freely available and open access. You can see all this information all broken down in the comprehensive data availability statement that the authors have provided, which even includes the open source hardware design of that 3D printable microscope. So when we look at this paper, what the metrics show is that this was actually a really valuable paper for the scientific community. So over 3,000 cumulative views, 400 downloads, almost 50 shares on social media, as well as 10 citations. You can see those citations listed in the image on the slide. And what's really great to see is the actual applications across disciplines. So we see citations from papers published in journals covering biology, chemistry, and optics, to name just a few. And the actual peer review process for this method article has also actually addressed directly how this paper is beneficial for the community. So one of the peer reviewers has commented specifically on the reproducibility of this paper, saying others will be able to build on this research using the methods the authors have described, as well as the techniques set out in the article itself. So this kind of impact really sort of demonstrates how valuable sharing methods can be, not only for the wider community, but obviously also for the authors who themselves now have published quite a highly cited paper in the form of this method article.
Great, thank you, Jack. So the final example of a diverse research output that we'll be discussing and providing an example of today would be a software tool article. So a software tool article will often mandate really to include the rationale for the development of the tool and details of the code used for its construction in line with our open source policy. So the article would provide evidence and examples of suitable input data sets and include an example of the output that could also be expected from the tool and how this output should be interpreted. We also encourage our authors to include tips and advice on how best to maximize the potential of a tool. And this in turn obviously helps to drive the reproducibility of both the tool itself and the elements that highlight this within the research output. So often researchers who have not developed a tool themselves will ask if they are still able to author a software tool. The short answer to this is yes, so long as the software tool articles written regarding, these can be written regarding new or existing softwares, apps, packages, and so on. The essential thing really is that they're describing original research. So it's worth mentioning that due to our status as an open and transparent publisher, software used as part of an article must also be open access, or an open access alternative must be provided, as failure to do so would inhibit the reproducibility of the research. Additionally, any code used or created must also be compatible with an open source programming language or an open alternative also provided. And software tool articles are one of our more popular alternative research outputs, and there's a plethora of gateways and collections which frequently highlight these. So just to provide a bit of context, gateways and collections are hubs of research outputs with a commonality. A full list of these can be found on the F1000 research platform. However, as the member of the publishing team responsible for managing the bioinformatics portfolio on F1000 research, this is an article type which I tend to see quite a lot in my day-to-day, and we always welcome the description of new software tools through this medium, particularly on the thematic bioinformatics gateway affiliated with the International Society for Computational Biology, also the R package gateway and the Python collection, among many others that we offer on F1000 research. So in terms of how this research output looks in practice, the example article I've referenced on this slide was authored by Professors Christopher Schmid and Helena Jambor, and presents a workflow for effective and ethical image presentation. The workflow in this case was based on the open source software Fiji, but its principles can be applied to other packages as well. And it's aimed to allow novice users with little or no prior experience in image processing to implement the essential steps towards publishing images. Again, if you are interested, I'd encourage you to seek this article out and read it, not just for its example as a software tool, but also for the subject itself. Similarly to the aforementioned data note and method article examples that we've shown previously, and with all papers on F1000 platforms, the metrics and citations are freely available to view by anyone accessing the research due to our transparent nature as a publisher. And this article in particular struck me as a really pertinent example of research which is looking to improve reproducibility, as it concludes by stating that a lack of truthful scientific communication and reproducibility are among the biggest problems faced by science today. So this paper really is looking to utilize the key elements and the primary aims and goal of a software tool article to help combat this somewhat. And with that, essentially, we've covered everything that we wanted to in this session. So Jack and I have looked to obviously summarize some of the key points we've discussed over this talk on this slide. But obviously, we appreciate that this is a huge topic of conversation across scholarly research and publishing. And as Jack exhibited on one of the earlier slides, we offer a wide range of different article types. So I do encourage you to look into these in a bit more detail and see how these could really help benefit your research and producing it in a reproducible manner. And of course, we're looking forward to hearing your comments or questions on what we've discussed to this point momentarily. In short, we hope we've illustrated how critical it is to produce research which is transparent, openly publishable, and openly published and reproducible, I should say, and the huge impact that this has had on ensuring that science continues to develop to tackle challenges and bolster knowledge across all disciplines. There can sometimes be a perception that producing reproducible research is beneficial to everyone besides the original authors, and hopefully we've been able to dispel that belief somewhat today. Traditional research articles have and likely always will play a huge role in driving knowledge in a subject, but equally the role that diverse research outputs can have on this should not be underestimated, such as data notes, method articles, and software tools as just 3 examples. By authors taking advantage of this plethora of different article types that are offered by both F1000 and other publishers, they can ensure that transparency and reproducibility is available in all elements of their published research. which will serve to drive trust in their results, methodology, and their wider research. And finally, we as publishers should, and speaking on behalf of F1000 will, continue to work with the research community to develop innovative and effective solutions to support reproducible research as best as possible.
Thanks, Tom. So just before we finish up and take some questions from everyone, I just wanted to point out our range of resources that we have available. So these are aimed at authors, peer reviewers, and readers, and they provide more detailed information on our article types, and you can also find more information in our really comprehensive article and data guidelines. We also have a dedicated blog on F1000 Research, which has published some fantastic pieces on the strides being made to tackle the reproducibility crisis, and I'd really encourage everyone to have a good read through those. We've also included the links in the slides to all these resources so you can easily access everything after the webinar finishes. So with that, I think we're ready to do one final poll. So we're going to ask everyone, just to finish up, which of these article types you think best supports reproducibility. So I'll ask Melissa to start the poll one last time.
Thanks, Jack. Yes, the poll is launched.
Thank you.
Closing the poll now.
Yep, thanks, Melissa. Okay, that's great. So we've got method articles, data notes, study protocols, all kind of well ahead of traditional research articles, as well as software tool articles there. So yeah, really great to see that everyone kind of agrees that there's a need for sort of a different range of article types to really tackle the reproducibility crisis. So I think we can move on to some questions now.